On Point, hosted by Peter Van Aartryk. Conversations with interesting and informative experts on technology, branding, culture, social media marketing, and other great topics.
Hello again, everybody. I'm Peter Van Aartryk, your host for On Point, brought to you by our good friends at Wells Media, which includes Carrier Management, Insurance Journal, and other fine publications. Today, we're going to talk about the value of customer experience research, and you might define your primary customer as an agent or broker, or the end consumer, the customer, the policyholder. It all depends. We're also going to explore the value of truly understanding what makes employees tick and how research insights can improve employee confidence to do great work to improve the customer's experience. It's all one big loop when managed well. Our guest today, this is very fun for me, is Mackenzie Wilson, who has a deep history in customer experience work and serves as Aartryk's research director. Welcome, Mackenzie.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, looking forward to this for a while. And on this podcast, we're going to turn the tables around on you, Mackenzie. I know you're the one typically asking all the great questions, so it's your turn.
Love it.
Yeah. So let's talk about you a little bit. Where are you from originally?
So I was actually born and raised in Arizona, but at this point I probably should call Utah where I'm from because I've been here for the last 20 years and loved every second of it.
Yeah. And whereabouts in Arizona?
I grew up in Tucson, and now I'm in Salt Lake City.
That's a great town. Tucson, that's where the Saguaro National Forest is, I think.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And it's a cool town. It was kind of a sleepy town, like what is down there, University of Arizona, but now it's really taken off as a town.
Yeah, it's true, and yet it still has its roots, and I go back and visit often. My some of my family still lives there, and it's so great to go back to where you were from, right, and still see some of the shops and some of the restaurants and the things you were used to seeing, but then also it just being surrounded by so much new real estate and it's pretty fun.
Yeah, I went there one time when I was in my mid-20s, and I just really liked it. And I went to the forest and everything. But I asked that because I was born in Mesa, Phoenix area. I didn't live there very long, but my dad was working for the Arizona State, he was an architect doing some construction for the university on the campus. So yeah, it's cool. I love going back out there. Yeah. So how did you get to where you are today? Talk about your career a little bit for us.
Well, I've had quite a few different, what I would call jobs, right? Versus kind of a career, which is where I feel like I've landed at this point. But I've always loved solving problems. So when I first started working, I worked at places like doctor's offices or law firms, and all of those experiences still allowed me in a way to consult and work with people or customers, right, to improve their overall outcomes on life or experiences in general. And as I started to do that, I just happened upon a job once that began researching at a company that specialized on quantitative and qualitative research for sales teams. And when I started doing that, there were parallels between what I had done at other companies, more on an individual basis with customers, their customers, and then now being able to synthesize it and put it into research to get that third-party feedback. At that point, obviously, that's where I gained like a real passion for not just gaining and getting that information, but also diagnosing the root causes behind why people either were happy or disappointed. And more than that too, right? That then inevitably goes from, okay, now I understand the customer experience, but I also want to understand what organizations and companies can do in order to improve and make impact on those client experiences for them to make more money too, right? So kind of the circle goes around.
Yeah. And in my experience, before there was always like terminology that would dance around this topic, just like there before the word brand was a thing, they would call it communications or marketing or something like that. And then brand became big, and then culture, the internal brand of the culture became big. And there's this cycle. But what occurred to me was that if you think about the insurance industry as just a collection of different organizations that work together and often compete with each other, but it's really big. And within that, there are small organizations, like an independent agency might have 10 people working it, or you can go up to a big multinational insurance carrier that might have 10,000 or 50,000 employees, a big broker, worldwide broker, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I think about customer experience being important to the business strategy, I really think it's important for our listeners to think that it's for every firm. And even in small agencies, they can lose touch with they think they understand who's on the books and what makes them tick, but they really don't know if they don't have a formal program to ask. So I hope you agree. And I also, the next question I have is like, why? What is the why of all this? Why is customer experience research so important to the strategy of the business?
So it's funny. You literally took the words out of my mouth when you're talking about
Sorry.
No, it's great. It's for everyone, right? Because when you think about quote unquote customer experience, it really is the foundation of any business, right? Not just even in the insurance industry. And then even in the insurance industry, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, but it's about companies focusing on the story, right? And what will come out of customer experience. I tell people, like, think about, why do people build products or services or solutions, right? They want to solve a problem. Every new initiative or new service offering or new product that we even as consumers have started with a problem. And if you're going to invest in building a solution for your customers, I mean, it only stands to reason that you would want to arm yourself with the best intelligence you could have to gain, to keep, and to enable your customers and employees to better serve people effectively and efficiently, right? Save money, but also make money. It's funny, sometimes companies talk about too, we're customer centric, or this customer centricity, or best customer satisfaction, or we listen to the voice of the customer. Just like you said, right? Buzzwords that come on and people talk about. But it literally only about 30%. And it's, overall in any industry, but even less when it comes time to the insurance industry, actually have a formalized program for voice of customer experience. So in the insurance industry, it's unfortunate, but they don't really actually invest today as much as you think that people would, and how much they talk about investing in any kind of voice of customer, whether that's an automated survey or that's, calls and conversations or an expert, which creates no action and focus on the actual customer, right? It's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Why do you think that is the case? Is it just they don't understand it, or is lip service, or it seems like an HR project, or why does it come off the rails? Because I think there might be intent there. Maybe they don't know how to do it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons. So when I say, voice of customer program, right, that does imply a specific and targeted initiative, right? Funny enough, again, you think about the insurance industry, and the insurance industry is so relationship based, right? Both the transactions themselves, the communications that are made, the way that you brand yourself is personal. And so it's not to say that companies don't care about the voice of the customer, but I think actually the hindrance is that there is an assumption that because we are a relationship driven industry, that we already know the customer. Right. So I think that's really the root cause behind the lack of investment and focus on a voice of customer program, is there is just a perception that, hey, we already know what customers think, or we already know what our employees feel in what they're doing. And so because of that, there's not an intentional focus on looking at it from a different perspective or aggregating that information or taking pulse checks because we assume we know it, right? So to your point, it's not a lack of care or trying. It's just a lack of a specifically generated program that allows for deeper insights that you wouldn't normally think you would get, that maybe we just assume we know. And the insurance industry is changing now, right? More rapidly than it has historically. And so this is like the most critical time for companies to be thinking about how can we sell more? How can we have higher satisfaction? And how can we create more growth within our existing customers?
Yeah. That really rings true to me too, Mackenzie, in my experience. The assumption that we know, I don't know how many meetings I've been to where there'll be discussion around platitudes of what mainly in my experience, it's been carriers who use independent agents and brokers sitting in a room, now they're sitting on Zoom, but they say, oh, I've heard agents say this, and this. And then there's somebody in the room. Typically, it's the person in charge of the field or someone in charge of a field office or someone who just sat with an agent, like face to face, and said, well, the other day I was talking to Susan at this agency and she said this, and this. And there's like this pause, like, oh, okay, well, maybe, but they listen. It's storytelling, but it shows that is a bit of customer experience right there, like original research. Now you take it a step further and, like you said, make it formal, where you're asking, and by the way, I know this sounds gratuitous, but you can't do it all yourself either. I know we're getting into the how a little bit earlier than we wanted to, but you can't always trust that the customer is going to say things to you and that you ask the right follow-ups, et cetera, that you might glean from having a professional involved here. So there's nuance to it, but I think you're spot on, Mackenzie, when you say they make assumptions, and that's very dangerous because, they'll tell you things that you may want to hear, but meanwhile, and I love what all the competitive intelligence work you do too, where they'll be sliding business off right under your nose to someone else because you haven't seen it coming because you're not as close to the customer as you think.
And it doesn't necessarily mean they don't like you as an individual or a relationship, but there are other advantages, right, from a competitive standpoint, that can influence those things that you don't know. And to your point too, there are some companies that do a better job even of gaining customer feedback, but oftentimes they're still done in silos. So even if you do feel like you have a program in place to gather customer feedback, many times that information is not aggregated together, right? So one department may do a certain piece of voice of customer research, or one department, again, may have substantial notes from the sales process or their customer check-ins and things like that, right? You could have so much customer data and feedback, but at the end of the day, it's very siloed within companies when you don't have a formalized program. So that really is the point too, is not only do you not know necessarily what you don't know, but you also need to create a program that then can be operationalized and not, created in silos or have only one objective.
Yeah, good point. So can we get a little bit more into the how? What are some of the best practices of customer experience work you've seen at most organizations and recommendations you make about the what, how often, who, et cetera?
Well, first recommendation, which is probably not a surprise and dare I say a rule for, a true voice of customer program, is to have a third party manage that program, right? Getting an external perspective is critical. It's not only, though, one of the pieces which you already mentioned, right? Oftentimes, as transparent and intimate as some relationships are with clients and prospects and even employees, right? There are things that can be said and are addressed better when it is through a third party partner, right? I mean, that is a lot of the reason why many companies go to a third party for research too. But I think what's actually more important and the bigger value add to using a third party that people often don't think about is that if you have a consultant that is communicating with customers, they then have all of that information in their brain, right? They have analyzed it across not just your company, but other companies in the industry, and then even broader outside of the insurance industry. And they have, an ability to take those insights and distill them in a way that is actionable. And one of the things that clients, after they start working with us, right, have seen, and you can attest to it, is they're like, man, it is so great to have somebody else say that to my leaders. I don't want to say it, or I can't say it the way that you're saying it. Like, thank you so much for being the person who can be direct and honest, but also be enough of an industry expert, right, to understand, the deep workings of that company. And you get people to move, right? And I would be the voice of that customer. And my job and your job is nothing other than sharing that feedback. Whereas if someone internally is doing that, well, they're going to be influenced by their job or their expectations or what they've heard. And so the message doesn't resonate. You can't be the good guy or the bad guy when you're in-house, but as a third party, they know when we're coming in, this is all we do. And this is the only thing we're sharing. We're not sharing our opinion in any of this. Mm-hmm. It all has come from the customer. So that's the coolest part, right? And honestly, if you ever need to sell as a person, the value to, your leader or whatever for a voice of customer program with a third party, that's what I would lead with. Isn't, oh, hey, it's an unbiased perspective. Well, no, hey, we're going to hire somebody who can actually speak to the rest of our organization in an unfiltered and, direct way to create true action and change.
Yeah. So on the best practice that engaging a third party is number one. Are there any other things you'd recommend? I know you probably would say it depends, but are there some things, some tenets that work, whether you're a 10-person agency or a 10,000 person?
So consistency obviously is another thing, right? I mean, think about other actions that we have within any company, right? The branding and the messaging, or, the sales cycle, or building and improving products and services. All of those things are iterative processes, right? Those are things that we have to continually do and maintain and pivot based upon what's happening in our lives, what's happening in the company, what's happening with the employees. And so I think it's important to have some kind of consistency. That's a huge thing. Another, best practice, honestly, is transparency within the whole organization to get buy-in. Most often, especially when you think about an initial voice of customer program, again, whether that's blind research or product development or sales and win and loss opportunities, or, existing customer feedback, oftentimes people become defensive first, right? I mean, it's normal for all of us to feel like, hey, you're going to talk to my customer. You don't know them like I do. Or what if they say something bad? And if they say something bad, what is my company going to do to me? And so there is a fear. And I always say, do not just have this be an executive initiative that is filtered down through the org, but rather take it from the bottom up and share it so that people feel like what they are being empowered with is content and opportunities to grow with their customers, and really that they are the change agent, not that they're being told they have to do this, right? Compliance is required, but rather collaboration is expected and desired and hoped for, because then everyone feels they have a stake in it, but also don't feel like they're going to be condemned for any of the feedback that's received.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting, because every organization will have people who live in fear, of being outsourced or downsized, I should say, or fired, et cetera. But those individuals, that's like an HR thing. What you're describing is really systemic to the entire organization. And I like what you said about the bottom up, because when people embrace change enthusiastically, it actually happens versus being told from the top down what to do. But when you're listening to the customer, and there's an employee piece here too we want to get into. That's the truth. That's the North Star. That's where we want to get to, right? I mean, it doesn't become a person's job. It becomes how we're set up to win as an organization.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on the best practice side? We talked about third parties, consistency, transparency. Anything else that comes to mind?
I don't think so. Again, to your point, the only other thing would be the mindfulness of, a specific requirement or need for each client. And that is stuff that, we determine when we have those initial meetings to recommend the right voice of customer program for them. And then not just to become complacent, but to make changes and then pivot to the next, most valuable voice of customer experience. Again, depending on where the organization and their overall goals and projected outcomes are. So, but that's contingent on each person and each client, and again, each department, which is great. That's why the collaboration is important.
Okay. So in your experience, Mackenzie, what are some things you've seen, the changes that firms typically wind up making? Do they fall into certain buckets that kind of rhyme across industry, or certainly rhyme in the insurance industry?
So it's funny, generally speaking, right? When you start a program for voice of customer, the initial feedback or quote unquote action, right, is very tactical and one-off in nature. Totally normal, right? And you would expect that, because everyone initially is so excited to get this feedback. But what they don't know or understand is how can it be operationalized and leveraged from a best practice perspective rather than a single transaction movement. Right? Let's say we do 50 calls and 50 interviews with customers. It's so funny to me, if this is the first time we've worked with them, that I get emails back from probably 10 or 20 different people at the company like, oh, I just spoke with Jane again, and she was so excited that you gathered her customer feedback, and now I'm implementing X, Y, and Z with Jane. And I'm like, that's wonderful. Why did you call Jane? Right? Why did you... it's okay to continue those relationships, but the irony is we're still perpetuating the same independent voice of customer research than an aggregate action-based voice of customer research. So,
right.
I'd say that's probably the first thing that happens is you start to see the results in individualized, again, tactical actions. But one of the things that becomes like the most exciting is when customers do begin to create change management programs and processes, right? Implementing best practices. They do operationalize a standard protocol for any voice of customer outreach and research. They become more proactive in requests for us to continue to reach out to customers or to diagnose certain problems they may be having in their organization. Again, that's usually phase two of any kind of engagement, because first they just need to have the realization that this data is insightful and so detailed and actionable. And then they need to think strategically, right, about how they leverage it. One example, right, which is one of my favorite examples, is had a client recently where they wanted to have a better process for customer experience. They wanted us to reach out to existing customers. And when we did the study, the thing that we found is overall satisfaction was good, right? Like a 7 or an 8 out of 10, not stellar, but good, right? As far as quantifying that. But what we also found was if you started to segment those customers into customers who have been with that company for less than a year, customers who are recurring customers for 10 plus years, and then customers who have been customers for a period of time, but low transactions, right? Like low opportunities and lower revenue spend, right? There was a different result in the way they felt and their level of satisfaction depending on those buckets, right? So naturally, we separate out those buckets to find out. And this client realized that nearly 40% of their new customers, right? The customers who had been around for less than a year were dissatisfied with their overall purchase and felt regret because they believed that our client, right, had not delivered on what was sold. So we talked to the executive team. We work together with both the sales, right, or the net new business group, as well as the customer experience teams and whatever. And we say to them, okay, well, there's a big gap here. What are we going to do? And literally revamped the whole process, documentation, tracking system, training materials, metrics, accountability, and systems internally, in order to have a better process, right, and consistency in moving a client from the point that we sell them to the point that we get them to be a customer for 10 years. Just that alone, right? Having a system in place and having people have to be held accountable, literally in less than 6 months, took that sector, right, of again, under 1 year customers to a 9.2 out of 10 rating in their overall satisfaction. And only 5% of all of their customers felt that they didn't get what they were delivered, right? Or what they didn't get delivered what they had purchased. So drastically different, right? Which obviously for a company improves their revenue, it increases their brand and their reputation. Like so many, employees are happier.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And that's just one example, right? There are other examples where you may just find a single issue like the level and the frequency of communication, right? We've had that with a client too. Well, the biggest problem I have with my company is that they don't talk to me enough proactively. Well, all that you got to do is speak with everybody, do a training on how they need to make changes in their communication plan and expectations as an organization. And sure enough, we interviewed those customers a year later. And what did we find? Oh, we found that responsiveness and communication and proactive, work was now a key driver or retention factor for those relationships. So it went from a risk to, a key differentiator for them. So these kind of changes can happen. It really is just about everyone investing in it and believing in it. And then, again, following the chain reaction between, recommendations to changes.
Yeah. Well, that communication thing is so key, where sometimes organizations feel more is more, when in fact more communications can actually be less. And
communication.
Clear, adequate, proactive, and just the right amount of frequency. It's hard to get that right if you don't ask. So totally agree with you on that one. But I want to save some time for the employee piece. we've learned over the years that, going back in time, you'd have people on Madison Avenue make advertising for you. It was like marketing was something on the outside and outside in. And the best brands today are built from the inside out. And that means having, employees who are well connected throughout the organization. They like the place. The culture is critical. Everybody knows that everybody sings in the same hymnal. They're working off of core values that make sense to everybody. They're authentic. They're enthusiastically embraced, all those things. But in your experience, I think, HR, well, certainly in mine, I guess more of a question for you. In mine, HR has sort of, quote, owned the culture, owned the employee, quote, satisfaction or happiness. And they're asking questions like, what do you think of our new 401k policy? What do you think about our new dress code? Do you like Zoom or Teams? Like, it's all this stuff, right? And I'm not saying it's not important, but you're a believer in something a little different. It's called employee confidence. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how it's, again, something that HR shouldn't be asking by itself and how it differs from employee satisfaction?
Yeah. So first, I love employee satisfaction, right? So it's great. Companies do nowadays, especially with all of the advertising and, all the best places to work and all of that, right? They depend on it to retain and recruit their people, right? So I'm not saying don't stop. Don't do that, right? It's important, builds reputation and brand, and honestly kind of helps, to your point, on some of those, day-to-day HR operational things. How much do we pay and when do we pay and what benefits do we have, right? Schedules, work from home or not. There's so many things. When we talk about employee confidence, the first thing I say is listen, voice of customer is not just the literal word customer. Voice of customer is the journey of every touch point of whatever you sell or serve. So at the end of the day, your customer could be, from a development side, a problem, right? Your customer could be someone who you've never spoken to before, or it could be your existing customer, or it could be your employee. And what we want to do is we want to help organizations to understand that in order to truly impact overall voice of customer improvement and success, you need to find out what subconsciously your employees are doing in order to create what the customers are telling us is happening, right? So as an example with the responsiveness we talked about, what if clients are saying, hey, our vendor is not responsive? Okay, well, now we need to understand the why. Do we just want to assume that the why is, well, they just don't talk to them and they don't reply? Well, no, there could be a reason why. So an employee confidence would take you to the understanding of why the perception of responsiveness is a problem, right? So it speaks to more of the subconscious, again, reactions of what we're doing. It could be something like, hey, does your company equip teams with all the resources or materials or content or systems or processes, right, to successfully do their job? Are they, armed today with the things that they need, or do they often question how they're going to get to be responsive to a customer, right? Are employees armed with other training materials? I tell customers not just training materials on, hey, this is our product and service. Hey, this is how long we've been in business. Hey, this is how you talk to this customer or that, but also personal and professional development. Are they confident in their own skill sets, especially as it relates to the way they serve, either directly or indirectly, right? Because everyone at a company serves a customer, even if they don't talk to a customer. They don't have a job if they're not selling to a customer. And then finally, is there clarity from your employees on what the market needs, right? Do they know the difference between you and your competition? Do they understand where the industry is headed? And can they answer important questions to your customers about how you are differentiating? It's so interesting that when we do voice of customer with customer interviews or surveys, and we identify some of the strengths and weaknesses of our clients and how they serve their customers, the only way you really could get true fundamental change is when you also find out from your employees, what do they believe are the root causes to that, right? Again, conscious or subconscious actions. What is going on that is making customers say and feel the way that they do? And we can only find that from talking to employees, right? They are the key to understanding how we can make our actual customers' experiences better and how we can have them take more ownership and feel more empowered to do that. So we can get customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction just from a survey about how they feel in their day-to-day work. But that's not going to give us any intelligence on why they do the things they do that then impact the reason the customers feel the way they do. So it's kind of just, again, this full circle perspective, because you can't change. You're just going to keep going around and around and around in the same circle, right? Until you can identify the why behind it and then make change.
Thanks for that, Mackenzie. I think the two general methods in these kinds of research insight have to do with anonymous survey, a quantitative approach, perhaps. But I know you're very good on the qualitative side, which means one-on-one or discussion groups or other methods to get a more meaningful conversation going with people. And you're talking with people all day long. So what do you find works best in getting folks to open up and authentically and candidly express themselves?
I love that question. So, you kind of said it already, but kind of listening is obviously the first thing you need to do.
Right.
As you talk to, again, your friends and peers, or in my case, my children, right? We always say, you need to listen to me. You need to listen to me. But we often forget that listening is not just hearing, right? Listening means being able to reiterate what that person said and then probe deeper into the reasoning behind it. And so in our day-to-day lives, it's just the same as in these conversations with any customers, is there needs to be a mutual understanding of you having a discussion to truly understand and care, not just hear what they're saying and write it down in notes. The other thing, right? I mean, I like to say it takes a certain amount of expertise to ask questions that maybe you think you already have the answer to, or your customer may already have the answer to, or even that respondent feels they already answered, but to ask it in a different way so that they think of responding and asking and answering that question in a different way. So that's where you get the deep, deep insights, right? Is kind of like rephrasing something a few different times to actually just continue to dig and dig and dig. Other things are obviously important. I like to be friendly, but you have to match the tone and make sure you know your audience. Empathy is critical. Even if you don't know someone, right? People can feel that. And they will open up to you. Obviously the only other thing is don't be ignorant, right? Know your client and your customers so that you can speak intelligently. But I think, the biggest things are really feeling the customer when you're on those.
It's kind of like a natural conversation. I found, you do this way more than I do, but when I've been in discussion groups, I've been one-on-one interviewing people, that what you said about rephrasing, don't you find at the very end or near the end of the conversation, like they'll say something, you're like, wow, that is significant, but it comes sometimes like out of left field because there's it's kind of like a stew or a soup you're stirring, and then you've got your questions that are critical, but as you rephrase things and hear, listen and hear and articulate back what they've said, all of a sudden they're like, and sometimes it's just a perfect soundbite that comes out of that conversation.
Funny too. I no matter what type of voice of customer or even employee, interviews I do, I have two questions that I always ask. So these are like my little secrets, but they're questions that make people think, right? The first is kind of something you may think, but it's, what could client X, right, have done differently, even if they're happy, even if whether it's a transaction or a long-term relationship, what could have been done differently, right? Not why do you feel the way you do, but what do they need to do differently in the future, right? What recommendation do you have for future development in doing something differently? And then by far my favorite question, which stumps up everybody, and yet I always get answers, is what question did I not ask that I should have? Right? Because then again, it turns it over to that respondent to be like, oh my gosh, wow, well, what should I have shared? What am I not thinking of? And it's amazing the kind of sound bites that you do get when you're in a call and they're not just spewing out what they knew they wanted to say or what they have said even in the past. Again, if they talk to their contact at our client, but you're really truly getting them to think more and dig deep into something they haven't thought of before.
Yeah, that's a good one. When we do media training, how to work with the media in the PR side, that's a great one if you get asked by a reporter, but also just be ready to essentially, even if it's nothing necessarily new, that you're restating your key point there. So it's a slightly different point, but it feels like a softball, but it makes people think,
Yeah.
and it makes them want to be smart and say something significant that may not have come up before. Anyway, well, as we wrap up here, Mackenzie, I have maybe something more on the personal side, but I've gotten good feedback from our listeners on it, and that is, do you have a guiding principle, a piece of advice, or something over the years that you stick to, sort of like your mantra that you could share with us?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. I feel like so many people have helped me in my life, right? Whether that's family or friends, or obviously coworkers who have, really been a mentor in my life. But as cheesy as it sounds, I think the best feedback I've gotten, and the people who have impacted my career the most have been customers. They truly, when you create a relationship with, the kind of clients that we do, doing voice of customer, there is no greater intimacy and care that you could ever have. Because if you're speaking to their customers, again, you are their voice. And then in turn, you create relationships where you want them to be successful. And you learn, right, that they are my guiding light on a day-to-day basis for how I can continue to help all clients, both their customers and then, the company as a whole to be more successful. So I guess, again, I know it sounds cheesy, but my advice and my mantra in life is literally, before you do anything, think to yourself, what does my customer want? What has my customer said? What could my customer say? And if you don't know that through research and analysis and communication, that's the first thing you need to do before you take another step. And that's my guiding light. Like that's, I live by it and I sell it, right?
I don't think it's cheesy. I think it actually is great to hear You said the word passion before, that you found your passion along the way, and you clearly love this stuff. It comes through when you present to our clients their findings, and they're really, you can't fake it. You can't fake the caring. So I really admire that. It's nice to have a career where you feel you're making a difference and you want to make a difference. So kudos to you, Mackenzie.
Oh, thank you. No, I love it. I know sometimes my children say, when asked what my job is, they tell people, my mom bosses people around and says how bad they are at all the things that they do so that they aren't bad anymore.
Oh, that is priceless. That's
true.
Priceless.
but it is, right? At the end of the day, I also obviously am a woman of passion and feelings and opinions.
Sure.
But I think it is, at the end of the day, it goes back to really thinking and caring about what those customers are saying, and then being able to just share it and get people to want to do something, not just the bad stuff. But it's interesting, right? A child's perspective of, hey, she just tells people to stop being bad. Like
she bosses people around.
Yeah, we all need it. So
we all need it. We all need a nudge. Yes. So Mackenzie, thanks again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you. And also, I know you're presenting at the Insurance Marketing Communication Association conference called Ignite in June in Scottsdale, speaking of Arizona. So we'll see you there too, and along with a lot of our clients and friends. So we look forward to that. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.
This has been On Point with Peter Van Artryk, a podcast presentation of Wells Media Group.